Farpoint 2014 brought us into contact with a ton of great people, and we've shared some of the interviews from that con and some of the panels. And we shared your Big Bang panel just a few weeks ago.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, but you guys, Miles M, had a chance to sit down with Alan Dean Foster, this iconic writer that's almost fits into the golden age of sci-fi as far as writers go. Tell me a little bit about that experience, Miles.
Well, this is a guy who's written fairly recently the tie-in novels for the new Star Trek movies, but he goes back a lot farther, and he tells us in the interview his experience about writing for the Star Wars tie-in novel.
Oh yeah,
which is a great story behind that. So we talked about his how he got started, some of his other books that are out there that our listeners are probably familiar with, and it's just always great to meet an author of books you have read in the past, and
of his caliber, for that matter.
Oh yeah, definitely. He's definitely a high caliber writer.
So, what was it like to kind of walk in there, or have him walk in and sit down and do this interview with him?
So he was really nice. He was, business and talk about and let's do stuff and we'll have a conversation. And actually, it was really nice to talk to. I really loved. There was a moment where we kind of went a little bit off book, and I think some kerfuffle was going on in the room we were recording in, and he just kind of told us a little story that was neat. And he tells, even just off the cuff, will tell a story beautifully. So I've not read his books, but I know a couple of people who knew who he was, and it was neat. I'm very curious to see what he's written down.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to hear the interview. I didn't listen to it yet, so I'll be listening to it when I edit this podcast together.
It is the best interview ever.
Awesome. Well, of course, you and Miles are doing it. So, all right. Well, without any further ado, here's our interview with Alan Dean Foster from Farpoint 2014.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're at Farpoint 2014, and we have the pleasure to be speaking with legendary sci-fi and fantasy author Mr. Alan Dean Foster, one of the few authors I know that's written both for the Star Wars and Star Trek franchises. Fans of the 2009 Star Trek movie and Star Trek Into Darkness will be interested to know that Mr. Foster wrote the tie-in novel for both those movies. Mr. Foster, welcome, and thank you for taking time to talk with us on the Sci-Fi Diary podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
What inspired you to be a writer?
I like to travel. I got that at a very early age from Scrooge McDuck.
All right.
Who, even though he was basically a little old man who had to wear glasses and a cane, he went all over the world inspecting his properties and having the most incredible adventures. And I thought, if a little old man with feathers can do that, I can do that too.
And you wrote about those adventures.
Every place I go and people I meet and the things that I see and the things that I'm lucky enough to do, sooner or later, even without planning it, ends up in a story.
Nice. A lot of us know you from your tie-in novel work. However, you've written your own original stories also. Can you please tell us a little about some of your original work?
I have several different series that were ongoing for years, some of which are still ongoing, at least in my mind anyway. One involves the universe of the Commonwealth, which is a fairly far future science fictional universe, and then there are series within that series. Then there's the Spellsinger series, which is takes place in a world and environment of talking animals and humans. I got that inspiration also from Carl Barks, the creator of Uncle Scrooge, and from a wonderful underground cartoonist who died much too young named Vaughn Baudet. I always wondered what would happen if Carl Barks and Vaughn Baudet ever collaborated, and since that wasn't a collaboration that was likely to happen even when they were both alive, I figured I would do it myself. Also, there are a lot of one-shot books. You mentioned travel, for example. I spent a month driving across northern India.
Oh, wow.
I covered 2,000 miles in a very small local car, and that became a book about near-future India called Sagramanda, published by Pirate Press, because I was interested in the thought of what would happen to an Indian city of 100 million people. 1 million people is a small city in India, even by today's standards. There are places, for example, like Bombay and Calcutta, where even the Indian authorities don't really know how many people live there. So extrapolating from that, the possibility of a city of 100 million people is very real, at least in India. And I was interested in exploring, how you would administer and deal with a city that size. How would you handle things like sanitation and police? Could you get an ambulance through it? What would you do with the sacred cows that nobody's allowed to touch and move in a city of 100 million people? And that's how Sagramanda came about. I don't mean to make it sound, so academic. It's an adventure story with various plot lines involving everything from a crazy French woman who goes out and ritually kills people because she's looking for Kali's lost finger, to a man-eating tiger, which, if you read the news today, is not even science fiction. So I'll do things like that from time to time just to get an idea out, and something that I can fully develop.
Meanwhile, I'm looking at the book about India on Amazon as soon as we're done, because that sounds amazing.
Oh, Sagramanda?
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story about the cover. I'm trying to remember the guy who did it. Won many Hugos already for Best Artist. And the publisher needed a placeholder for the cover to show to distributors and stuff. And he had done this wonderful painting of a tiger, roaring tiger. And they just threw it on the cover there, and all the distributors liked it so much. So that's a great cover painting. That's terrific. So they didn't tell him that it was just supposed to be a placeholder and that he was going to do the cover later. They used that for the cover. And then somebody thought it would be nice to have some Sanskrit on the front, but they did it upside down because nobody really knew what Sanskrit looked like. But since you're not going to get many Sanskrit literate people anyway, it wasn't a problem. Very few people picked up on that.
I'm sure there'll be that collective that shows up at the con going, this is wrong.
Sanskrit's upside down. Furthermore, it says, stupid white people will buy anything.
Now, being a Star Wars fan as well as Star Trek fan, can you tell us how you got the job to write the Star Wars tie-in movie now? I know there's a story behind that.
I had had 3 original novels and a number of novelizations come out at that point. The third novel was called Ice Rigger, and it's the first book of a trilogy. It's an adventure novel, very, very much in the old Planet Stories tradition, I think, but maybe a little more scientifically accurate. Somebody, I don't know who to this day, had read the book and had mentioned it around the people who were working on Star Wars and thought that it was in the same spirit as Star Wars, and that because I had done something like that and had already done some novelizations, I might be a good person to do the novelization of this movie that George Lucas was working on. I had an interview with Tom Pollock, who was George's lawyer at the time and later became, I believe, head of Universal Studios film production. And on the basis of that, I was then sent to have a brief hello with George. Mm-hmm. So I'd get his final approval, and I was sent out to Industrial Light and Magic, which at that time was in a rented warehouse on Kester Avenue in Van Nuys, part of Los Angeles, 5 minutes from where I grew up, actually. So I knew exactly where it was. And I went out there, and there were all these broken up model kits all over the place, and there was this very strange thing, very much like this table we're sitting at here, only much, much bigger, with all these little plastic building-type structures out in the parking lot. That was the trench for the Death Star at the end scene. It was too big to put inside the building. They didn't have a room big enough or uncrowded enough inside to put it inside, so thanks to Southern California weather, they were able to shoot it outside, apparently. And I went inside, and George was busy. So there was this fellow who came over. He said, "Hi, I'm John Dykstra. You want to see this really neat camera I've built?" And it was really the first computer-controlled camera that anybody had used for anything. So he's showing me. I should have paid more attention. He's showing me all these wonderful technical details like a tech guy would. And then George came out, and we met and said hello. And he said, "Come here, I'll show you some stuff." And it's like, here's the Death Star. It's this beach ball-sized piece of plastic that's all been modified and worked over. And we got along really well and had a very brief chat. He was, needless to say, very busy.
Oh, yeah.
I saw some dailies. They had some dailies which were basically TIE fighter shots with no background and no music and no sound effects. And while we were watching that, Saul Bass came in, another legendary figure in the history of Hollywood. And George was just like a fanboy, very much, which I can understand. I kind of was too, getting to meet very briefly Saul Bass. And then I went home with a copy of the screenplay and wrote the book.
Wow, that's great.
That's amazing. My turn?
Go ahead.
Now, I'm sorry, I got so lost in that story. It was great. being that you've written a tremendous amount of tie-in novels, many of which Miles has read and told us a lot about, what's the great thing, or what brings you a lot of joy in writing these novels, and what are some of the challenges?
I'm still basically the 14-year-old kid sitting in the back of the movie theater with his friends, loudly criticizing the bad special effects. If you extrapolate from that to what I do now and what I've been doing for the last 40-odd years, I'm still that same 14-year-old kid. The difference is I get to correct the bad special effects for real. So I get to make essentially my own director's cut of all of these films. I get to add to the characters that I want. I want more of a character, I get to write more of that character. I want more of a scene, I get to write more of that scene. If there's bad science, which there almost always is in a lot of these movies, I get to fix the bad science. Generally, now there are rare occasions, fortunately they are rare occasions, where the studio or the producers will get involved and they'll say, no, you can't do that, or we don't want you to do that. But generally, since the novelization is just an ancillary product, it's not like selling the film rights to, say, what they call British Commonwealth rights. It's a small thing. They don't bother you because A, they don't care, or B, they're just too busy. But every once in a while, somebody will get involved, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. Usually they're just happy to see that you are able to make a book out of the screenplay. Because most screenplay writers, no matter how good they are at writing screenplays, and this is not a knock on screenplay writing, it's just a different discipline, don't write novels. They're so attuned to paring everything down to the bare essentials that expanding them into a full-length book is just not something they do very well. Conversely, most novel writers aren't very good at writing screenplays. They are two different specialties. So you're generally left alone.
Nice.
I've really enjoyed talking to you. I've enjoyed reading most of the movies. Like you see, I'll read the tie-in novel also, and so I've probably read dozens of what you've written. How can our listeners find out more about you and check out some of your past works and your upcoming works?
I have a website, big surprise, www.alandeanfoster.com. I update it every month. Very quick read, and it'll usually say what I'm working on, what's coming out, and I'll post pictures from my travels. So it's not just a general chat site, it's also an informational site. And there's a great deal of accumulated information on it. People who are interested in the Commonwealth books, for example, will find a complete chronology of the Commonwealth with all of the books listed in chronological order and broken down by individual series. And there are maps of the Commonwealth, and there's an interactive map. You click on this planet, you get a description of the planet. So that's kind of fun. And then there are, well over 100 pictures from travels. And it's a good way to keep up.
Great. Mr. Foster, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for your time, sir.
Absolutely.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Now who's ready for dessert? The Sci-Fi 5 and 5, where we bring you the top 5, the worst 5 of anything in science fiction.